The showroom was quiet in the way expensive places often are. Not silent, just controlled, voices low, movements measured, every interaction polished to feel important. A man stood near a high-end sedan, studying the vehicle with a calm that didn't match the environment. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't impressed. He wasn't performing interest. He looked like someone evaluating decisions, not seeking approval. Across the showroom, a manager noticed him and frowned. Not because the man had done anything wrong, but because he didn't look like the type of customer the dealership wanted to entertain. The manager walked over with confidence sharpened into authority, posture straight, tone already prepared to assert control. "Sir," he said loud enough for others to hear, "this area is reserved for serious buyers." The sentence wasn't aggressive. It didn't need to be. It carried the weight of assumption, the kind that decides someone's value before learning their name. Nearby conversation slowed. A salesperson paused mid-sentence. A couple glanced over, then quickly looked away, unwilling to step into tension that didn't belong to them. The man by the car didn't argue. He didn't explain himself. He didn't flash credentials. He didn't show irritation. He simply turned his head slightly, acknowledging the manager without reacting to him. That stillness felt heavier than any confrontation could have. The manager mistook silence for embarrassment. "Window shopping is fine," he continued, voice firm. "But if you're not here to make a purchase, I'll need you to move to the front." The implication hung in the air. "You don't belong here. You don't qualify. You're wasting our time." The man took a slow breath. Not the breath of someone flustered, but the breath of someone deciding whether a situation deserves a response at all. Across the showroom, employees kept their smiles in place, pretending nothing unusual was happening. Because in spaces like this, comfort often matters more than fairness. The man stepped back from the car. Not because he was intimidated, not because he accepted the judgment, but because he had already learned something valuable. He had seen how quickly respect could disappear, how easily people relied on appearances, how confidently authority could be performed without understanding. He glanced once around the showroom, not to seek validation but to observe behavior, tone, and priorities. Then he turned calmly toward the exit. No anger, no argument, no explanation. Just quiet certainty, the kind that doesn't defend itself because it doesn't need to. And no one in that moment realized that the person being dismissed wasn't a customer being turned away, but the owner who had been watching how his business treated people when it didn't know who he was. The dealership ran on appearances more than transactions. Glass walls reflected ambition. Bright lights polished every surface into something that felt premium, even when it wasn't. Sales desks were spaced carefully, not for comfort, but for control. Every detail was designed to make customers feel like they were stepping into status. Staff members moved with trained confidence. Smiles were practiced. Voices were smooth. Compliments were calculated. They had learned how to spot serious buyers, not through data, not through conversation, but through clothing, posture, and assumptions. In this place, image often came before character. A luxury environment creates an unspoken rule. People who look like they belong are welcomed. People who don't are questioned. And most people followed that rule without ever thinking about it. Behind the scenes, the manager shaped the culture. Not through loud commands, but through subtle signals. Who deserved extra attention? Who was worth time? Who could be brushed aside without consequence? Employees learned quickly what behavior earned approval. Encourage high-status clients. Keep uncertainty at a distance. Avoid anyone who might waste time. Over time, courtesy became selective. Politeness turned conditional. Respect became something that had to be earned instead of given. In that environment, hesitation was interpreted as weakness. Quiet confidence was mistaken for lack of authority, and restraint often looked like insignificance. Meanwhile, customers moved through the space unaware of the silent hierarchy guiding how they were treated. Some were welcomed warmly before speaking a word. Others felt dismissed before even asking a question. The system didn't announce itself. It simply operated, and that's what made it dangerous. It felt normal. In the center of it all, the man who had been asked to step away earlier moved through the space with a different rhythm. He wasn't impressed by the design. He wasn't distracted by the atmosphere. He noticed what others overlooked: tone changes, body language shifts, the subtle difference between genuine service and performed courtesy. He watched how employees reacted when they thought no one important was watching. He observed which voices carried authority and which were careful to stay quiet. Most people in the room were trying to appear confident. He didn't need to. His calm wasn't passive. It was observant, measured, intentional. While the dealership continued its routine, greeting some guests warmly, dismissing others quietly, a quiet contrast formed between performance and authenticity. And slowly, without anyone realizing it yet, that contrast began to matter more than appearances ever had. The manager's patience finally snapped. He straightened his blazer, adjusted his tie, and stepped closer to Jason, as if closing the distance would somehow reassert control. "Sir," he said, voice tight and clipped, "this dealership caters to serious buyers, people who respect our standards. If you're not here to make a legitimate purchase, I'll have to ask you to leave." Jason looked at him calmly. No raised voice, no defensiveness, no need to prove anything. He simply glanced around the showroom. Luxury sedans sat under bright showroom lights. Sales associates hovered nearby, pretending not to stare but clearly watching every move. A few customers whispered to each other, sensing tension but unsure why. Jason rested his hand lightly on the roof of a black flagship model. "Tell me," he said quietly, "what qualifies someone as a serious buyer?" The manager scoffed. "Appearance, presentation, intent," he replied sharply. "People who walk in looking like you rarely close deals." Jason nodded slowly. "Interesting," he replied. The manager crossed his arms. "Look, I don't want to be rude," he said, though his tone said otherwise. "But we've had issues with time wasters, pranksters, and people who come in just to sit in cars they can't afford. This is a high-end establishment. We protect the experience of our real clients." Jason met his gaze. "And you believe I don't belong here?" he said. "That's correct," the manager replied bluntly. A heavy silence fell between them. Nearby, one young sales associate shifted uncomfortably. He looked like he wanted to intervene but didn't dare challenge his boss. Another employee subtly checked Jason's watch. Understated, expensive, easy to miss unless you knew what to look for. Jason removed his sunglasses and placed them in his jacket pocket. For the first time, the staff could see his full expression clearly. Not angry, not embarrassed, not defensive. "Just observant. You run this dealership?" Jason asked. "Yes," the manager answered proudly. "And I've worked hard to build its reputation." Jason nodded again. "Then you understand that reputation is built on judgment," he said. The manager smirked. "Exactly. And my judgment tells me you're not a customer we should be entertaining." Jason glanced toward the glass-walled offices at the back of the showroom. "Does it?" he asked softly. The manager leaned in slightly, lowering his voice as if delivering a private warning. "I'm giving you one last chance to walk out with dignity," he said, "or I can call security." Jason looked at him for a long moment. The room felt smaller, quieter, tighter. Then Jason reached into his jacket. Several employees stiffened, unsure what he was about to pull out. Instead of cash or credentials, he removed a simple phone. He unlocked it slowly, without urgency. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Jason said calmly. "But I am curious, not defensive, not reactive." The manager rolled his eyes. "Curious about what?" he snapped. Jason lifted his gaze. "How people treat others when they think status decides worth," he replied. That line hung in the air. A few customers exchanged looks. The manager forced a laugh, though it sounded strained. "This isn't a philosophy class," he said. "This is a business." "Exactly," Jason replied, "and businesses reveal character." The manager's jaw tightened. "I'm done wasting time," he said sharply. "Security?" A guard at the entrance shifted, uncertain. Jason finally looked directly at the manager with full intensity. Still calm, still controlled, but unmistakably serious. "Before you do that," Jason said, voice steady, "ask yourself something." The manager hesitated. "What?" he demanded. Jason tilted his head slightly. "If you're wrong about me, what does that say about how you treat everyone else?" The question wasn't aggressive. It wasn't accusatory. It was reflective, aimed at perspective, not facts. The manager scoffed again, but this time his confidence wavered just a little. "You're trying to bluff," he said. "I've seen your type." Jason gave a faint, almost amused smile. "Maybe," he replied, "or maybe you've never questioned the assumptions that make you feel powerful." The tension escalated. Employees stood frozen. Customers leaned in. The guard waited for a clear command. Jason slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Make your decision." The manager stared at him. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The manager stood there, staring at Jason, caught between irritation and uncertainty. He hated hesitation. It made him feel exposed. "Security," he repeated louder this time. The guard took a cautious step forward. But before he could reach Jason, A quiet voice spoke from behind the sales counter. "Sir, wait." Everyone turned. It was the young sales associate, the same one who had been watching Jason's watch earlier. He looked nervous, not defiant, just careful. The manager shot him an irritated look. "What is it?" he snapped. The associate swallowed. "I think we should double-check," he said, "just in case." The manager scoffed. "Double-check what?" he demanded. "The guy's wasting our time." The associate hesitated, then spoke more clearly. "That watch," he said, glancing at Jason. "It's not common. And his jacket, it's custom. I'm not saying anything for sure. I'm just saying we might want to confirm before making a scene." The manager clenched his jaw. He hated being questioned in front of staff. But now eyes were on him. Customers, employees, everyone waiting to see how he'd respond. He turned back to Jason with forced authority. "Fine," he said sharply. "If you're here on legitimate business, prove it." Jason didn't look insulted. He didn't rush. He simply pulled out his phone again, calmly, deliberately, and opened an email thread. He turned the screen slightly so the manager could see. "Look up the name," Jason said quietly. The manager frowned. "What name?" he asked. Jason tilted the phone. The manager leaned closer. He read the name once, then again. The color drained from his face. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't theatrical, it was subtle. A tightening of the jaw, a flicker in the eyes, but enough for everyone nearby to sense the shift. He straightened quickly, trying to mask it. "That doesn't prove anything?" he muttered. Jason met his gaze. "Then call corporate," he said, "or open the internal ownership file. You'll find the same name." The manager hesitated. For the first time, his confidence cracked. A senior salesperson, older and more experienced, stepped closer. He whispered, "We should check." The manager felt the room turning against him. He forced a tight smile. "Fine," he said, turning toward his office. "We'll verify this." He walked quickly to the glass-walled office, pretending he was still in control. Inside, he opened the internal system, typed the name. Hit enter. The screen loaded. His breath caught. The profile appeared unmistakable. Ownership stake, legal authority, final decision power, not a customer, not a visitor, the owner. His stomach dropped. Outside the office, staff and customers watched his body language change. His shoulders stiffened. His posture shifted. His arrogance softened into tension. He walked back out slower now. Jason stood exactly where he had been the entire time. Calm, still, unmoved. The manager stopped in front of him. The silence felt heavier than before. He started, then stopped. The word wouldn't come. Jason looked around at the showroom. The cars, the employees, the customers who had witnessed everything. Then he looked back at the manager. "You asked me to prove I belonged here," he said quietly. The manager swallowed. "Yes, sir," he replied, the honorific slipping out instinctively. Jason tilted his head slightly. "Interesting how quickly that word appears," he said, not mocking, just observing. The manager forced an apologetic smile. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "If we'd known," Jason raised a hand gently. "No," he said calmly. "You knew enough." That sentence landed harder than any insult. "You knew how I was dressed. You knew how I spoke. You knew how I carried myself. And based on that, you decided I didn't deserve respect." The manager's face tightened. "That wasn't my intention," he muttered. Jason looked at the employees nearby. "Was it?" he asked quietly. No one answered. A few looked down. Others looked uncomfortable. Jason turned back to the manager. "I don't care about the apology," he said evenly. "I care about the habit." The manager stiffened. "Habit," he echoed. Jason nodded. "The habit of deciding someone's value before you know their story," he said. "The habit of protecting an image instead of treating people fairly." The manager nodded awkwardly. "We'll address it," he said quickly. "We'll retrain staff." Jason's expression remained steady. "This isn't about staff," he said. "It's about leadership." That word landed directly on the manager. Leadership. The manager straightened, but his authority felt weaker now. "I've built this dealership from the ground up," he said defensively. Jason met his gaze. "And in building it," he replied calmly, "did you build respect or fear?" The question lingered. Not aggressive, not accusatory, reflective. Customers watched silently. Employees waited, unsure whose side to stand on. The manager struggled to answer. Jason took a slow step forward. "I didn't come here to fire anyone," he said quietly. "I didn't come to embarrass you." He looked around once more. "I came to see how power behaves when it thinks no one is watching." The manager looked uneasy. "And now?" he asked carefully. Jason paused, not for drama, but for thought. If someone without status walked in tomorrow, How would you want them to be treated? The question wasn't about facts. It wasn't about proving anything. It invited perspective, forcing reflection, not defense. The manager hesitated. For the first time, he didn't answer immediately. The power dynamic had shifted. Not because Jason raised his voice, not because he threatened, but because the manager now understood something painful. He hadn't just misjudged a man, he had revealed his own character. The showroom no longer felt like a place of sales. It felt like a place of judgment. Not against Jason, but against the manager. A quiet ripple of awareness spread through the room. Customers who had been browsing now watched with subtle curiosity. Sales associates stood straighter, more alert, suddenly aware that their daily behavior carried more weight than they had realized. The manager felt it. Not as noise, not as confrontation, but as pressure, a pressure that came from being seen. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Statham," he said carefully, forcing professionalism back into his voice, "I want to formally apologize for how this situation was handled." Jason didn't respond right away. He looked around at the staff instead. A receptionist at the front desk avoided eye contact. The young associate looked relieved but tense. A senior salesperson watched with a thoughtful, almost uneasy expression. Jason spoke quietly. "An apology matters less than awareness," he said, "because awareness changes behavior. Apologies don't." The manager nodded, though the words stung. "I understand," he said, but his tone revealed something deeper, not just regret but fear. Fear of consequences, fear of losing status, fear of being judged the same way he had judged others. Jason walked slowly toward the center of the showroom. Every step felt intentional. Not dramatic, not threatening, just controlled. "I want to make something clear," he said calmly. "This isn't about punishing anyone." The manager looked up quickly. Jason continued. "It's about understanding what this environment teaches people." He gestured around. "When customers walk in here, they should feel welcomed, not measured. When employees work here, they should feel accountable, not entitled." He looked directly at the manager. "And when someone walks in who doesn't fit the expected image, they shouldn't have to earn basic respect." A quiet silence followed. The manager swallowed. "You're right," he said, voice lower now. "I let assumptions guide my reaction." Jason nodded slightly. "That's more honest than most people get," he replied. The manager straightened, trying to regain composure. "What would you like to do moving forward?" he asked. Jason paused. He didn't rush to answer, not because he wanted control, but because he wanted the response to mean something. "I want this to become a learning moment," he said. The manager frowned slightly. "A learning moment," he repeated. Jason nodded. "For your staff, for the culture here." He turned toward the employees. "How many of you have ever seen someone judged the moment they walked through those doors?" he asked calmly. No one answered out loud, but several people shifted uncomfortably. Jason nodded. "That silence tells me enough," he said. He turned back to the manager. "You didn't just misjudge me," he continued. "You modeled behavior that others will copy." The manager felt the weight of that statement. He glanced at his staff. For the first time, he wondered how many times his tone, posture, or attitude had shaped how they treated customers. Not through instruction, but through example. "I didn't realize," he muttered. Jason met his gaze. "Most people don't," he replied. "That's why power needs reflection." The manager nodded slowly. "Then let's correct it," he said, more sincerely now. "Training, accountability, whatever it takes." Jason studied him for a moment. He wasn't looking for fear. He wasn't looking for obedience. He was looking for understanding. "We'll start with transparency," Jason said. "No quiet punishments, no hidden warnings. Just a clear acknowledgement that a mistake happened, and a commitment to better judgment." The manager exhaled. "That's fair," he said. A middle-aged customer nearby whispered to his companion, impressed by the restraint. Another customer nodded subtly, as if approving the calm authority Jason carried. Jason looked around once more. "You run a luxury dealership," he said. "People assume luxury means arrogance." He glanced at the cars, the polished floors, the bright lights. "Prove them wrong." The manager nodded, slower this time. "I will," he said. Jason turned his attention to the young associate who had spoken up earlier. "You," he said calmly. The associate froze for a second. "Yes, sir," he replied nervously. Jason looked at him with a slight nod. "Thank you for suggesting verification instead of escalation," he said. "That takes awareness." The associate flushed, surprised. "Thank you," he murmured. Jason turned back to the manager. "Encourage that behavior," he said. "People who think before they judge." The manager nodded again. Will, he repeated. But something inside him had shifted. Earlier he had felt powerful. Now he felt accountable. And accountability weighed heavier than authority. As Jason began walking toward the exit, the tension in the room softened, but the impact remained. Employees whispered quietly to each other. Customers resumed browsing, but with a new sense of respect. The manager stood still, watching Jason go. He realized something uncomfortable. If Jason hadn't been the owner, nothing would have changed. The realization stung. Not because he'd been embarrassed, but because he'd been revealed. Jason stopped near the glass doors and turned slightly. "One more thing," he said calmly. The manager straightened. "Yes," he replied. Jason's voice remained steady. "Every person who walks through those doors is someone's family, someone's future, someone's story." He paused briefly. "Treat them like you'd want someone to treat yours." The manager nodded, unable to argue. Jason exited the dealership without fanfare. No applause, no drama, no victory speech, just quiet consequence. Inside, the manager finally exhaled. He looked around at his staff. "This doesn't end here," he said, more softly now. "We're going to change how we operate." The employees nodded, some relieved, some thoughtful, some uncertain, but all of them aware. This wasn't just about one moment. It was about the standard going forward. And for the first time, the manager understood that real authority wasn't about deciding who belonged. It was about deciding how everyone should be treated. The next morning, the dealership opened like any other day. Same polished floors, same bright lights, same lineup of flawless cars. But the atmosphere felt different. Not louder, not stricter, just more aware. The manager arrived earlier than usual. He walked through the showroom slowly, noticing things he had ignored before. The way staff greeted customers, the tone they used, the assumptions in their expressions. Yesterday's moment replayed in his mind, not as humiliation, but as exposure. He gathered the staff before opening hours. Everyone stood in a loose semicircle. Sales associates, receptionists, finance officers. "I made a mistake yesterday," he said plainly. No defensive tone, no excuses, just ownership. "I judged someone based on appearance," he continued. "And in doing so, I showed you a standard that I don't want this place to follow anymore." Some employees looked surprised. Others looked relieved. The manager exhaled. "From today forward," he said, "we treat everyone as if they matter because they do. No applause, no dramatic speeches, just a quiet reset." Later that afternoon, Jason returned, not for business, but to observe. He walked through the doors unnoticed at first. This time, the receptionist greeted him with the same warmth she gave every customer. "Welcome," she said politely. "Let me know if you need anything." A sales associate approached, not with suspicion, not with judgment, but with professionalism. "Feel free to explore," he said. "I'm here if you have questions." Jason nodded. He didn't reveal who he was. He didn't need to. He watched how people behaved when they didn't know. That was the real test. He noticed small changes. More patience, less assumption, more listening. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. The manager spotted Jason across the showroom and approached carefully, not as someone trying to impress, but as someone trying to do better. "Thank you for giving us a second chance," he said quietly. Jason looked around once more. "This isn't a second chance," he replied calmly. "It's a responsibility." The manager nodded. "I've been thinking about what you said," he admitted, "about leadership, about habits." Jason met his gaze. "And?" he asked. The manager hesitated. "I realized I wasn't protecting standards," he said honestly. "I was protecting my ego." The admission was uncomfortable, but real. Jason nodded slightly. "That realization matters more than any apology," he replied. They walked a few steps together. The manager gestured toward the showroom. "I want this place to feel different," he said. "Not just luxurious, but fair." Jason paused. "Then ask yourself one question every day," he said. The manager looked up. "What question?" he asked. Jason answered quietly. "If I didn't know who this person was, would I still treat them with respect?" The question wasn't meant to trap. It wasn't meant to test facts. It invited reflection, perspective over proof. The manager nodded slowly. "I will," he said. Jason glanced at a young couple browsing nearby. They weren't dressed expensively. They didn't look wealthy. But a sales associate spoke to them with patience, explaining features, answering questions, treating them seriously. Jason watched silently. A small change, but a meaningful one. As he walked toward the exit again, he realized something. The real transformation hadn't been about revealing ownership. It had been about revealing bias. Outside, the sunlight reflected off the glass storefront. Jason paused briefly, looking back through the window. Inside, people moved with a slightly different energy. More thoughtful, more aware, more human. He turned and walked away, not as the owner, not as a celebrity, but as someone who had tested a system and forced it to look at itself. Inside the dealership, the manager returned to his desk. He opened a blank document and typed a new internal policy title: Respect First. Not because it sounded impressive, but because he finally understood what it meant. The story didn't end with punishment. It didn't end with revenge. It ended with awareness. And awareness, once awakened, is hard to ignore. Weeks later, the dealership no longer felt like the same place. Not because of new rules on paper, but because of subtle shifts in behavior. Customers noticed it first. People who once felt intimidated now felt comfortable asking questions. Visitors who didn't look wealthy were still offered test drives. Conversations felt less like screening and more like service. Small change, big signal. The manager noticed it too. He caught himself before reacting, paused before assuming, listened more than he spoke. Not because he feared consequences, but because he feared repeating the mistake that had exposed him. One evening, after closing hours, he stood alone in the showroom. Lights dimmed, cars silent, the polished floor reflecting rows of vehicles that once symbolized status. Now they symbolized responsibility. He thought back to the moment Jason had been asked to leave. Not with shame, but with understanding. He realized the incident hadn't revealed Jason's power. It had revealed the manager's mindset. And mindset, once revealed, becomes impossible to ignore. The next day, Jason returned one last time. Not announced, not formal, just walking in like anyone else. This time, no tension followed him. A receptionist smiled. A salesperson nodded respectfully. No one whispered. No one stared. Jason walked calmly through the showroom. The manager approached, not nervously, not arrogantly, just professionally. "You came to check on us," he said quietly. Jason nodded slightly. "I came to see if the lesson stuck," he replied. The manager gestured toward the staff.
"They're trying," he said.
"So am I." Jason looked around. He saw effort, not perfection, awareness, not fear, progress, not performance. "That's enough," he said calmly. They walked a few steps together. The manager hesitated, then spoke honestly. "I used to think authority meant control," he admitted. "Now I realize it means responsibility." Jason glanced at him. "And responsibility means what?" he asked. The manager thought carefully. "It means treating people with dignity, even when there's nothing to gain." Jason nodded. "That's the difference between image and character," he said. They stopped near the entrance. The glass doors reflected both of them. Two men who had once stood on opposite sides of a power imbalance. Now they stood on equal ground. Jason turned slightly. "This situation could have ended differently," he said. "I could have punished you. I could have embarrassed you." The manager nodded. "But you didn't," he said. Jason's tone remained calm. "Because this was never about winning," he replied. "It was about revealing how people behave when they think status decides worth." He paused. "And whether they're willing to change when they realize they were wrong." The manager looked thoughtful. "Some people would have doubled down," he said. Jason nodded. "Most do," he replied. He looked around one final time. "Growth isn't loud," he said quietly. "It's uncomfortable. It challenges ego. It forces reflection." Jason turned toward the exit. Before leaving, he stopped and added one last thought, not as an order, not as a threat, but as a perspective. "Every customer who walks through those doors is a test," he said. "Not of their wealth, but of your character." The manager nodded, absorbing it. Jason stepped outside and disappeared into the daylight. Inside, the dealership continued its routine, but with a different internal standard. Not perfection, not performance, just a conscious effort to treat people fairly. And that became the real ending of the story. Not a dramatic victory, not a public apology, not a viral confrontation, but a quiet shift in how power was understood. Quick question for you watching right now. Should respect depend on someone's status, or should it be given equally to everyone? Time passed. The moment at the dealership slowly faded from conversation, but it didn't fade from memory. Not for the staff, not for the manager, not for the people who witnessed it. The change wasn't dramatic. There were no banners about new values, no corporate speeches, no public announcements. Instead, the difference showed up in small, everyday moments. A customer who looked uncertain was treated with patience instead of pressure. A visitor who didn't look like a buyer was still offered a test drive. A complaint was handled with listening instead of defensiveness. Subtle, quiet, real. The manager found himself thinking differently. When someone walked in wearing simple clothes, He no longer assumed they were wasting time. When a customer hesitated, he no longer saw inconvenience, he saw uncertainty. He realized something uncomfortable but important. The mistake he made with Jason wasn't rare. It was common. It was the kind of mistake people make when they confuse status with worth. One evening, long after closing, he stood alone in the showroom again. He looked at the cars, once symbols of success, now reminders of responsibility. He thought back to Jason's calm voice. Not angry, not vengeful, just observant. Jason hadn't tried to dominate him. He had made him aware. And awareness lingered longer than fear ever could. Meanwhile, customers who visited the dealership began to notice the tone shift. Some left positive reviews, not about discounts or deals, but about how they felt inside the showroom. Didn't feel judged. They treated me seriously. Felt respected, even though I was just looking. Those comments mattered more than sales numbers, because they reflected something deeper, a change in culture. Jason never returned for attention. He didn't post about it. He didn't use it for image. But occasionally he'd pass by the dealership, not to control it, but to quietly observe whether the lesson survived without him. And most of the time it did. Not perfectly, not always, but enough to prove the moment wasn't wasted. The story didn't become a headline. It became a reminder. A reminder that power doesn't always need to shout. A reminder that respect shouldn't depend on appearance. A reminder that the smallest decisions often reveal the biggest truths. Inside the dealership, new employees eventually joined. They never saw the original incident, but they felt its impact. Because the standard had shifted, not written on the walls, but practiced in behavior. The manager sometimes wondered, if Jason had never been the owner, would he have ever realized his mistake? The answer unsettled him, and that discomfort kept him honest. In the end, there was no dramatic final scene, no public punishment, no viral confrontation, no loud justice. Just a quiet legacy, a business that learned, a leader who grew, and a single moment that proved how revealing human behavior can be when status is removed from the equation. The real lesson wasn't about who Jason was. It was about how people choose to treat others when they think no one powerful is watching. And that question, how we treat people when there's nothing to gain, remained long after the story ended.